Good evening. This is Pamela, and you are listening to Watchmen on the Pod. All right, we are going to finally get back into Martyrs Mirror. I got to put a blanket on. It's a little chilly. The story of 17 centuries of Christian martyrdom from the time of Christ to AD 1660. And this was compiled by Thielman, J. Van or Von, not sure how to pronounce that, Braght. And we are in part L, I have written, because I wasn't sure on how to label these. So anyway, here we go. Zenobius and his sister Zenobia beheaded after many torments for the testimony of Jesus Christ at Aegea in Cilicia, AD 285. Not long afterwards, under the same emperor and proconsul, and in the same year, Zenobius, bishop of the church of Aegea and Cilicia, and his sister were apprehended. And when there were held out to him, on the one hand, great wealth, honor, and position, if, in accordance with the command of the emperor, he would serve the gods, but on the other hand, manifold torments, Zenobius answered, I love Jesus Christ more than all the riches and honor of this world. Death and torments which you threaten me, I do not consider a disadvantage, but my greatest gain. Having received this answer from the martyr, Lysias caused him to be suspended on the rack and inhumanly tortured on his whole body. While the executioners were busy with Zenobius, his sister Zenobia, having learned of it, came running, crying with a loud voice, Thou tyrant, what villainy has my brother committed, that thou dost cruelly torment him? Having thus addressed Lysias and set at naught his entreating as well as his threatening words, she too was seized by the servants, stripped naked, and stretched out and roasted beside her brother on a red-hot iron bed or roasting pan. The tyrant, deriding the martyr, said, Now let Christ come and help you, seeing you suffer these torments for him. Zenobius replied, See, he is already with us, and cools with his heavenly dew the flames of fire on our bodies. Though thou, surrounded as thou art with a thick darkness of wickedness, canst not perceive it on us. Lysias, almost beside himself, commanded that they should be put naked into boiling cauldrons. But seeing that the boiling water did not injure them, or at least they could not thereby be made to apostatize, he had them taken out of the city and beheaded. Their dead bodies were buried by Caius and Hermogenes in the nearest cave. This happened AD 285 on the 30th day of October in the city of Aegea in Cilicia. Wow. Thraicus, Probus, and Andronicus, three pious Christians, first very dreadfully tormented, then thrown before the wild beast, and finally thrust through for the faith of the Son of God at Tarsus in Cilicia, AD 290. At Tarsus in Cilicia, the birthplace of the Apostle Paul, there were imprisoned, AD 290, three pious Christians, namely Thraicus, Probus, and Andronicus, who, having been brought to prison before the tribunal and to the rack, and having suffered beyond measure for the name of the Lord and the faith in Jesus Christ, were finally put to death, concerning which we shall notice and present to the reader the judicial proceedings as we have found them in ancient authors. When Diocletian was emperor for the fourth and Maximin for the third time, Thraicus, Probus, and Andronicus were brought by the captain Demetrius before Maximus, the president, at Pompeiopolus. First examination of Thraicus. Maximus first asked Thraicus his name, because the latter was the oldest. Thraicus answered, I am a Christian. Maximus said, be silent about this ungodly name and tell me your name. Thraicus again replied, I am a Christian. Maximus said to his beadles, break his jaws and tell him not to answer me thus any more. Thraicus responded, I have told thee my best name, but if thou desirest to know how my parents called me, my name is Thraicus, and when I followed war, I was called Victor. The president asked him, of what nation art thou, Thraicus? And he answered, of the noble nation of the Romans, and was born at Claudianopolis, a city in Syria. But being a Christian, I have abandoned war. The proconsul said, thou art not worthy of the pay, but how didst thou leave the service? Thraicus replied, I asked Publius, our general, for permission, and he discharged me. The president said, have regard of thy age then, for I desire thee too to be one of those who obey the commands of our lords, the emperors, so that thou mayest be promoted by me to great honors. Come hither, therefore, and sacrifice to our gods, for the princes themselves, who are the monarchs of the whole world, honor the gods. Thraicus answered, they err grossly, however, they are seduced by Satan. The president said, smite him on the cheek, because he has said that the emperors err. Thraicus replied, yes, I have said it, and say it still. That they as men are liable to err. The president said, sacrifice to our gods and forsake thy folly. Thraicus answered, I serve my God and sacrifice to him, not with blood, but with a pure heart. For these sacrifices, namely such as are stained with blood, are unnecessary. The president said, I have pity for thy age, therefore I admonish thee to forsake this folly and sacrifice to the gods. Thraicus replied, I will not depart from the law of the Lord, and because I honor the law of God, I shall beware of such wickedness. The president said, is there then another law besides this, thou wicked wretch? Thraicus answered, your law commands to worship wood, stone, and the work of man. Thraicus put to the rack. The proconsul or president then said to his hangman, smite him on the neck and tell him not to speak such folly. While they were beating Thraicus, he said, I shall by no means abandon this confession which saves me. The proconsul said, I shall make thee forsake this folly, and be more prudent. Thraicus answered, do what thou wilt. Thou hast full power over my body. Maximus, the proconsul, said to his servants, strip him and scourge him with rods. Thraicus answered as he was scourged, truly, thou hast made me more prudent. Since these stripes thou strengtheneth me more and more in my confidence in God and his anointed, Jesus Christ, who is his Son. The president said, thou accursed and unrighteous fellow, how canst thou serve two gods at once? See now, thou dost certainly confess more than one God. Why then deniest thou whom we worship? Dost thou not confess Christ and the Lord? Thraicus answered, yes, I do, for he is the Son of God, the hope of all Christians, for whose sake we are wounded and healed. The president said, leave off this useless babbling. Come hither and sacrifice. I do not say much, replied Thraicus, but I speak the truth. For I am now 65 years old, and have believed thus, and do not desire to depart from the truth. Demetrius, the centurion, said, O wretched man, spare thyself, sacrifice, and follow my advice. Thraicus answered, depart from me, thou servant of Satan, with thy advice. Maximus commanded them to put heavy iron chains on him and take him back to prison and to bring forth another. Probus examined. Demetrius, the captain, said, Lord, here is one already. Thereupon the president said to Probus, tell me first thy name. Probus answered, in the first place, my noblest name is that I am a Christian. Secondly, men call me Probus. The proconsul asked again, "Of what nation and descent art thou?" Probus replied, "My father was from Thracia, a citizen, born at Pergamus in Pamphylia, but I am a Christian." The proconsul said, "Thou shalt not gain much by this name, but listen to me and sacrifice to the gods, that thou mayst be honored by the princes and be our friend." Probus answered, "I desire neither honor from the emperors nor thy friendship, for not small was the wealth which I forsook in order faithfully to serve the living God." The proconsul commanded them to take his cloak off him, strip him, rack him, and scourge him with raw thongs. While they scourged him, Demetrius the captain said, "O wretched man, behold how thy blood is spilt upon the earth." Probus replied, "My blood is in your hands, but all these torments are a precious balm to me." After he was scourged, the proconsul said to him, "Thou wretch, wilt thou not yet cease from thy folly, and dost thou still persist in thy obstinacy?" Probus answered, "I am not vain, but more courageous in the Lord than you people are." The president said to his servant, "Turn him over and scourge him on his stomach." Probus prayed, saying, "O Lord, come and secure thy servant." Maximus, the proconsul, said to the executioner, "While you scourge him, ask him, saying, 'Where is thy helper?'" Probus replied as they scourged him, "He has helped me and shall still help me." The president said, "Thou wretched man, do spare thine own body, for the earth is soaked with thy blood." Probus answered, "Be assured, the more my body suffers for the name of Christ, the more my soul is healed and quickened." After he had been thus scourged and tortured, the proconsul commanded them to fetter his hands and feet with irons, and thus keep him in prison, however, to bring before him another. Andronicus examined. Demetrius, the centurion, placed Andronicus before Maximus' judgment seat, saying, "Sir, here is the third one." The proconsul said, "What is thy name?" Andronicus answered, "Wouldst thou openly know who I am? I am a Christian." Maximus said, "Those who have preceded thee have gained nothing by this name. Therefore thou must answer me aright." Andronicus replied, "Men generally call me Andronicus." Maximus asked him of what nationality he was. Andronicus answered, "Of noble blood." Maximus said, "Spare thyself and hearken to me as to thy father, for those who have prated such nonsense before thee have gained nothing by it. But honor thou the princes and the fathers, and be obedient to our gods." Andronicus replied, "Thou didst well call them fathers, for thou art of the father, the devil, and having become one of his children, thou doest his work." Boy, he really nailed that on the head there, didn't he? Huh. Maximus said, "Wilt thou, a stripling, despise and mock me? Knowest thou not what torments are ready for thee?" Andronicus said, "Dost thou think I am a fool, that I should be willing to be found inferior to my predecessors in suffering? I stand prepared to endure all thy torments." The proconsul commanded that he should be stripped, ungirded, and suspended to the torture stake. Demetrius, the captain, moved by pity, said, "Listen to me, wretched man, before thy body be racked." Andronicus answered, "It is better that my body perish than that thou shouldest do with my soul according to thy pleasure." Maximus said, "Take advice and sacrifice before thou be tortured to death." Andronicus replied, "Never from my youth up did I sacrifice, and do still not wish to do so, though thou constrain me." Maximus said, lay on and rack him well. And Anaximus, the hornblower, who was to execute the sentence, spoke to Andronicus, saying, "I am old enough to be thy father. I advise thee to the best. Do what the proconsul commands thee." Andronicus replied, "Because thou art older and hast no understanding, therefore thou advisest me to sacrifice to stones and evil spirits." While he was being tormented, the proconsul said, thou wretched man? Dost thou not feel any torments, seeing thou hast no compassion upon thyself? Dost not forsake thy folly, which cannot save thee? And dost not say, it doesn't make any sense. Let me reread that. Thou wretched man, dost thou not feel any torments, seeing thou hast no compassion upon thyself? And dost not forsake thy folly, which cannot save thee? Andronicus answered, My sincere confession, which thou callest a vain folly, is perfectly good, as putting all hope and confidence upon the Lord our God. But thy temporal wisdom shall die forever. The president asked, Who is it that has taught thee this folly? Andronicus replied, The quickening word by which we are quickened teaches us that our Lord is in heaven, who works in our hearts the living hope of our blessed resurrection from the dead. Maximus said, Desist from this folly before we torture thee. Hold on. Until we torture thee still more severely. I wanted to mark that because I really liked what he had said there. Just going to mark it real quick, and then I'm just going to repeat it because I really, really like what he said right there. Andronicus replied, The quickening word by which we are quickened teaches us that our Lord is in heaven, who works in our hearts the living hope of our blessed resurrection from the dead. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's beautiful. Maximus said, Desist from this folly before we torture thee still more severely. Andronicus answered, My body is before thee. Thou hast full power over it. Do as it pleaseth thee. The proconsul said, Torture him exceedingly on the mouth. Andronicus replied, The Lord sees that you punish me even as a murderer. The president said, Dost thou still despise the commands of the princes, and thinkest thou my tribunal is without power? Andronicus answered, I trust in the mercy and truth of God's promise, and therefore I suffer all this patiently. Maximus asked, Have then the princes transgressed, thou wretched man? Andronicus replied, Yes, according as I understand it, they have, for it is a transgression to sacrifice to idols. While he was being tormented, the proconsul said, Turn him over and torment him on his sides. Andronicus said, I am before you, torment me as you please. The president said to the executioners, Take potsherds and scrape open the old wounds. When they had done this, Andronicus said, You have strengthened my body by these torments. Maximus said, Ere long I shall exterminate thee. Ere long I shall kill thee. Andronicus answered, I do not fear thy threats. My sentiments are better than all thy wicked thoughts. Then the proconsul commanded that irons should be put on his neck and feet, and he be kept with the others until the second examination. Second examination of the three aforementioned Christians. When Maximus held court the second time over these faithful witnesses of Jesus Christ and sat upon his judgment seat, he said, Call in the ungodly Christians. Demetrius, the captain, answered, Here I am, my lord. Then said the proconsul to Thraicus, Knowest thou not that age is honored in many respects? Hast thou then not considered it, whether thou wilt still persist in thy first intention? Yea, advise with thyself, and sacrifice to the gods for the prosperity of the princes, that thou mayest attain to honor. Thraicus answered, If the princes and others who are of the same opinion with you knew what there is in honor, they themselves would turn away from the blindness of their vain conversation. Thraicus put on the rack the second time. The proconsul said to his beadles, Strike him on the mouth with stones, and say to him, Desist from thy folly. Thraicus answered, If I did not exercise more care for my salvation than you people do, I would be as foolish as you are. The president said to him, See, they have knocked thy teeth out. Do have compassion upon thyself. Thraicus replied, Do not imagine this, for though thou shouldest cause every one of my members to be crushed, I could still remain strong and steadfast in him who strengthens me. The president said, Believe me, it is better for thee that thou sacrifice. Thraicus answered, If I knew that it were better for me, I would not wait for this advice from thee. Then Thraicus ceased to speak. The proconsul said to his hangman, Smite him on the mouth and make him speak. Thraicus replied, My cheeks are knocked to pieces. How can I answer any longer? Let's see. Maximus said, And wilt thou, madman, not yet consent to worship and sacrifice to the gods? Thraicus answered, Although thou hast deprived me of my voice, so that I cannot cry aloud, thou shalt nevertheless not injure my soul, but thou hast in this hour greatly strengthened me, in my opinion. Maximus said to his servants, Bring fire, stretch out his hands, and put fire on them. Thraicus replied, I do not fear thy temporal fire, but I would have to fear eternal fire, if I should obey thee. When the glowing fire was laid upon his hands, the president said, See, the fire is consuming thy hands. Desist, therefore, from thy folly, and sacrifice to the gods. Thraicus answered, Thou speakest to me as though, because of thy cruelty, I had already yielded to thy wish. However, but through the grace of God, I am in all my sufferings as strong as ever. The proconsul said, Tie his feet together and hang him up by his heels, and make a thick smoke under his face. Thraicus replied, I neither regard thy fire, nor do I fear thy smoke. When he was hung up, Maximus said to him, There shalt thou hang, until thou consentest to sacrifice to the gods. Thraicus answered, Thou mayest sacrifice, for thou art accustomed to sacrifice human beings. But for me, it is not lawful. Maximus said to his servants, Bring vinegar mixed with salt, and pour it into his nostrils. Oh my God. Note, here a whole leaf is wanting in the original, namely of the tortures which Thraicus, Probus, and Andronicus suffered in the second examination on the rack. However, concerning Andronicus, the following additional was found. The proconsul said, namely to Andronicus, All this nonsense can avail thee nothing, but come and sacrifice to the gods, that thou mayest not perish under the punishment. Andronicus replied, It is the same that thou hast heard the first and the second time, for I am not a child to be moved or turned by words. The president said, You shall nevertheless neither conquer me nor despise my tribunal. Andronicus answered, We do not conquer thee, but our Lord Jesus Christ strengtheneth us. The president said, The next time we hold court over these men, let other modes of torture be put in practice. In the meantime, put him, Andronicus, in irons, and keep him in prison until tomorrow, and let no one see him. The three martyrs examined on the rack the third time. The president said, Call the ungodly Christians in. Demetrius the centurion answered, Here I am. Thraicus brought forth first. When he had brought forth Thraicus, the proconsul said, Dost thou still despise imprisonment, bonds, punishments, and tortures? Follow my advice, O Thraicus, and abandon this confession, which profits thee nothing. Rather sacrifice to the gods, by whom all things exist. Thraicus answered, Woe shall come upon them. Thou thinkest that the world is governed by them, whereas they are destined for eternal fire, and not they only, but all those who also serve them. The president said, And dost thou not yet desist, thou impious blasphemer? Or thinkest thou not that for thy rash words I should cause thee to be instantly beheaded? Thraicus replied, Then I would not die a lingering death, but a short one. But let me have a long conflict, that in the meantime my faith in the Lord may grow and increase. The president said, Thou and thy fellow prisoners must die according to the laws. Thraicus answered, What thou sayest is an evidence of thy ignorance, for those who do evil die justly. But we who know of no evil, that is, who have committed nothing worthy of death before men, have suffered for the Lord, expect with confident hope the heavenly reward from the Lord. The proconsul said, Thou accursed miscreant, what reward have ye to expect, seeing you die for your wickedness? Thraicus replied, It is not lawful for thee to inquire into or to ask what reward the Lord has laid up for us in heaven, and therefore we patiently suffer the wrath of thy madness. The president said, Darest thou thus address me, thou accursed one, as though thou wert mine equal? Thraicus answered, I am not thine equal, but it is lawful for me to speak, and no one can silence me for the sake of him who strengtheneth me, namely the Lord. The proconsul said, Thou miscreant, I shall deprive thee of the power. Thraicus answered, No one can take away the power from me, neither thou, nor your princes, nor Satan, the father of you all. Thraicus put to the rack. The president said, Now, seeing thou art bound and suspended in order that you may be tortured, sacrifice in time before I cause thee to be punished according to thy deserts. Or deserts? I think it's deserts. Thraicus replied, That thou mayest do. But since I was formerly a soldier, thou mayest not torment me with all manner of punishment. Yet, lest thou think I might yield to thy perverseness, go on, and devise and inflict upon me all sorts of punishment. The president said, Do not think that I shall sentence thee at once. I shall cause thee to be put to death by degrees. Thraicus answered, Whatever thou intendest to do, do at once, and do not threaten. The president said, If thou think that some women will come and embalm thy body, thou art greatly mistaken, for it is my intention that nothing shall remain of thee. Thraicus replied, Do with my body as pleases thee, now as well as after my death. Maximin said to the proconsul, Break his jaws and tear his lips. Thraicus answered, True, thou hast crushed and marred my face, but thou hast quickened my soul. The president said, Thou wretched man, desist from thy vain thoughts and sacrifice, that thou mayest be delivered from these pangs. Thraicus replied, Dost thou think I am a fool or a madman, and that I, who trust in the Lord, shall not live in heaven? Thou mayest deprive me of this temporal life for a little while, but thou wilt thereby cast thine own soul into eternal damnation. The president said to the executioners, Put the branding irons into the fire and brand him on his cheeks or shoulders. Thraicus answered, Though thou inflict many more torments than these upon me, thou shalt nevertheless not turn the servant of God to the shameful idolatry of devils to worship them. The president said, Bring me a razor, cut off his skin, shave his head bald, and put burning coals upon it. Thraicus replied, And though thou cause my whole body to be flayed, I shall still not depart from my God, who strengtheneth me to endure all the weapons of your torturing. The president said, Get the branding rods, let them get still hotter, and apply them to all his members and joints. Thraicus, as he suffered this, cried out, May the Lord look down from heaven and judge. The president said, What Lord dost thou call upon, thou accursed fellow? Thraicus answered, The Lord whom thou dost not know, and who recompenses every one according to his works. The president said, And shall I not exterminate thee as I have told thee? Yea, even thy remains I shall burn, and scatter thy ashes to the wind, that the women may not come and wind thy dead body in a cloth to embalm it with precious ointments and spices. Thraicus replied, I have said it, and say so still. Do what thou wilt. Thou hast full power over my body in this world. The president said, Put him back into prison, and keep him until the next time for the wild beast. Let another be brought before the tribunal. Probus brought forward. Demetrius, the captain, said to proconsul, Sir, here he is already, namely Probus. The president said to Probus, Advise with thyself, Probus, that thou mayest not fall again into the same punishment. For others who, on thy account, have persisted in their obstinacy, have rued it. Sacrifice now, therefore, that thou mayest be honored by us and the gods. The president said, advise thyself. I did that. Probus answered, We are all of one mind, serving God with one heart and soul. Think not, therefore, that thou wilt hear anything different from us, for thou hast ere this heard and seen enough to convince thee that thou canst not turn us. Here I stand before thee the third time. Do not yet regard thy threats. What dost thou wait for, then? The president said, Ye have conspired together to deny the gods. Bind him and hang him up by his heels. Probus replied, Dost thou not yet cease to fight for Satan? Maximus said, Believe me, before thou be tormented, have compassion upon thine own body. See what dreadful torments are being prepared for thee. Probus answered, All that thou mayest do unto me shall conduce to the comfort of my soul. Therefore do what thou wilt. The president said, Heat the branding irons red hot, and apply them to his sides, so that he may desist from his folly. Probus replied, The more foolish I appear to thee, the wiser I shall be in the law of the Lord. The president said, Press the branding irons on his back. Probus answered as he was suffering, My body is subject to thy power, but God will behold from heaven my humility and patience. In the meantime, the president commanded that meat and wine should be brought, which had been sacrificed to the idols, saying to the executioners, Pour wine down his throat, and take meat and force it into his mouth. While they were busy doing this, Probus said, The Lord behold from his high throne the violence ye do to me, and judge my cause. The president said, Thou wretched man, thou hast suffered so much, and behold, thou hast thyself received the sacrifice. Probus replied, Ye have not accomplished much by doing me violence. The Lord knoweth my intentions. The president said, Thou hast eaten and drank what was sacrificed to the gods. Probus answered, The Lord knoweth it, and hath seen the violence I have suffered. The president said to the executioners, Apply the branding iron to the calves of his legs. Probus replied, Neither the fire, nor the torments, nor thy father Satan can turn the servant of God from his confession. The president said to his servants, Let sharp nails be heated, and put them into his hands. Probus answered as he suffered this, I thank thee, O Lord, that thou hast made my hands worthy to suffer for thy name. The president said, The many torments have deprived thee of thy mind. Probus replied, The great power which thou hast not only made thee a fool, but also blind, for thou knowest not what thou art doing. The president said, Thou who hast been tormented on thy whole body, excepting the eyes, darest thou speak thus to me? Pinch his eyes, said he to the executioner, say he may gradually become blind. When this had been done, Probus said, Behold, thou hast also deprived me of my bodily eyes, but thou shalt never be permitted to destroy the eyes of my faith. The president said, Dost thou think thou wilt survive all these torments, or that thus thou shalt die happy? Probus answered, Fighting thus, I gradually approach the end, so that I may finish my good and perfect confession, and be put to death by you without mercy. The president said, Take him away, bind him, put him in prison, and let none of his companions come near him, to praise him for having continued so steadfast in his wickedness. He, too, shall be cast before the wild beast at the next show. Andronicus put to the rack. Then said the president, Let Andronicus come forth. Demetrius, the captain, said, He is already here. The president said to Andronicus, Have at least compassion on thy youth. If thou hast prudently advised with thyself to reverence the gods, consent and sacrifice to the gods, that thou mayest be released. Andronicus answered, May God never suffer thee, O tyrant, that I do aught against the law of God. Thou shalt never shake my good confession, which I have founded upon my Lord. Here I stand ready for thee to make manifest on me thy hardness. The president said, Methinks thou art ravening and possessed of the devil. Andronicus replied, If I had the devil in me, I should obey thee. But because I confess the Lord, I do not submit to the commands of the devil. But hast not thou the devil in thee? For being deceived by the devil, thou doest the works of the devil. The president said to the executioners, Make bundles of paper and put fire upon his body. When this was done, Andronicus said, Though I burn from head to toe, the spirit nevertheless, is alive in me. Thou shalt not conquer me, for the Lord whom I serve is with me. The president said, Thou madman, how long wilt thou remain thus obstinate? Seek at least to die upon thy bed. Andronicus answered, As long as I live, I shall overcome thy wickedness. The president said, Heat the branding irons red hot again, and put them between his fingers. Andronicus replied, O foolish despiser of God, thou art full of the wicked thoughts of Satan. Seest thou not that my body is almost consumed through the manifold torments thou hast inflicted upon me? Thinkest thou that now at the last I shall begin to fear thy devices? I have Christ dwelling in my heart, and despise thy torments. The president said, Thou miscreant, I knowest thou not this Christ, whom thou worshipest, became man, and was punished under the judge Pontius Pilate. Andronicus answered, Be silent, for it is not lawful for thee to speak evil of him. The president said, What gainest thou by thy faith and hope in this man whom thou callest Christ? Andronicus replied, I have thereby in expectation a great reward and gain. Hence I endure all this so patiently. The president said, Break open his mouth and take meat that has been sacrificed from the altar and force it into his mouth and pour in wine also. Andronicus called God to witness, saying, O Lord, Lord, behold what violence I suffer. The president said, How long wilt thou thus obstinately endure the punishment? See, thou hast certainly eaten of that which has been sacrificed to the gods. Andronicus answered, Cursed be all who honor the idols, thou and thy princes. The president said, thou miscreant, cursed thou the princes who have obtained for us so lasting and tranquil peace? Andronicus replied, They are cursed, who, as the pestilence and as bloodhounds, turn the whole world upside down, whom the Lord by his mighty arm shall confound and destroy. The president commanded the executioners, Put an iron into his mouth, and with it break out all his teeth, and cut out his blasphemous tongue, that he may learn no more to blaspheme the princes. Take away his teeth, and burn his tongue to ashes, and scatter the latter all about, lest his fellow Christians or some women gather his remains and keep them as a precious relic. Take him away from here and put him into prison, that at the next shout he, together with his companions, Thraicus and Probus, may be thrown before the wild beast. It is declared that the above account concerning the examination of the 3 aforementioned Christians were written entirely by the heathen themselves, who put them to death. Only a few words have been altered to make the sense clearer. A certain celebrated author mentioning this writes as follows: Herewith ends the 3rd examination or inquisition on the rack, and thus far these proceedings with the martyrs have been recorded by the heathen clerk of the criminal court himself, and were doubtless afterwards bought for money by the Christians. Beloved reader, I could not forbear to translate these records just as they were, for the most part word for word, not only because I have found them to be true and genuine in every respect, but also because we can very clearly see therefrom what form of inquisition or examination the heathen employed against the Christians, as well as with what manifold torments the obdurate heathen sought to compel the Christians to apostatize from the faith, and how remarkably God preserved his own against the devices and wiles of the devil. It need not seem strange to the reader that the proconsul and criminal judges so frequently put to the rack the same Christians to cause them to apostatize from the faith. For Lacatinus tells us of a president in Bithynia who for 2 years endeavored by all manner of torments to compel a Christian to apostatize, and who, when this Christian finally seemed to yield, boasted of it just as though he had conquered a whole province of a barbaric country. As touching the rest of the matter, that is, how, when the sentence of the proconsul was executed, the heathen have not recorded it, but some Christian brethren, namely Macarius, Felix, and Verus, probably bought those records from the clerk of the criminal court and added from their own observation what was wanting, since they had been eyewitnesses of it at the theatrical drama the following day. An account of the death of the aforementioned martyrs written by some Christian brethren who witnessed it. Numerous Maximus, proconsul of Cilicia, summoned Terentian, the provider of public sacrifices and theatrical performances, which were held in Cilicia, commanded him to provide for the dramas for the next day. The following day, a great number of men and women assembled in the amphitheater, which was situated about a mile or 1,000 paces from the city. When the amphitheater was filled with people, Maximus also came to witness the play, and in the first act of it, when many wild beasts were let out at the same time, many human bodies were devoured. We Christians kept ourselves concealed and waited with great fear for the bringing forth of the martyrs. Suddenly, the proconsul commanded the soldiers to bring in the Christian martyrs, namely Thericus, Probus, and Andronicus. The soldiers compelled some to carry the Christian martyrs on their shoulders, for they were torn and lacerated to such a degree that they could not walk. We then saw them carried thus disfigured into the amphitheater, and seeing how they had been maltreated, we turned our faces and cried bitterly. Thus the martyrs were thrown down into the middle of the arena, as the offscouring or refuge of this world. And when the multitude beheld them, they were all frightened, and the people murmured greatly against Maximus for having thus tormented them, and then yet sentencing them to be thrown to the beast. Yea, many went away from the amphitheater, censuring Maximus for his inhuman cruelty. When Maximus saw this, he commanded the soldiers who stood near him to note those who murmured against him and were leaving, so that he might afterwards examine them in regard to it. In the meantime, he commanded that the wild beasts should be let out to rend the martyrs. In order to avoid prolixity, we shall sum up what follows here in the aforementioned account of the Christian brethren in these words. The wild beasts were let out, especially a frightful bear, and then a lioness, both of which, indeed, by roaring terribly, made a dreadful noise, so that also the spectators were frightened by it. But they did not harm the martyrs, much less tear or devour them. The proconsul, in his rage, commanded the spearmen to thrust the bear through. The lioness, however, on account of the fear of the people, was let out by a black door, which were broken in pieces. Then Maximus ordered Terentian to let in the gladiators, who should first kill the Christians and then fight with each other for life. These, when they came in, first thrust through the martyrs, which happened on the 11th day of October, A.D. 290, at Tarsus in Cilicia. When the drama was over and the proconsul was about to go home, he left 10 soldiers in the amphitheater, charging them to mingle the dead bodies of the martyrs with those of the heathen gladiators, that the Christians might not be able to distinguish them. However, it is stated in the above account that the Christians removed their dead bodies and buried them in a cave in a rock. In regard to this, A. Milanus, who was referred to it, has the following remark. They who did this also wrote the conclusion of this history. Hence, we have not the least reason to doubt the veracity of this account of the proceedings against the martyrs. Let's see, wow. An account of the holy baptism of the martyrs in the 4th century. Brief summary of baptism in this century. At the close of the 3rd century, the eminent Arnobius was introduced, and inasmuch as his life extended from one century into the other, we refer to him again here in the beginning of the 4th century. He speaks of the virtue and benefit of baptism, as may be seen in the proper place. Fusca and the handmaiden Mura were baptized after previous instruction. At this time, in the time of Sylvester, there existed such sects as were afterwards called Waldenses, Anabaptists, etc. One Donatus was called an Anabaptist, and his followers Anabaptists. Anastasia, while yet a child, indicated with other children that at Alexandria they baptized upon confession of faith. In Canon 12, 13, and 15 of the Council Nice, several good things are established with regard to baptism. Ananias, having become a man teaching wholesome doctrine, not only with respect to baptism, but also in regard to other matters of religion. Soon after him comes Marius Victorinius, who joins together faith, confession, and baptism. Then appears Hilarius, who wrote very appropriately on baptism and also opposes Antichrist images and traditions. Monica, the mother of Augustine, was baptized in adult years, though she was born of Christian parents. In the Council of Caesarea, the candidates for baptism, the baptizing of pregnant women, Christ's baptism, etc., were discussed. Again, sects appeared who were like the Baptist. Saint Martin was instructed from his 12th to his 18th year and then baptized. He strongly opposed war. Ambrose was baptized in adult years at Milan, though his parents were Christians. He advanced sound views on baptism, against war, of the sacraments, etc. Ephraim Gregory of Nyssa, the councils of Laodicea and Elibertum, and also Opatidas Melabatanius give correct views on baptism. Gregory of Nazianzus, the born of Christian parents, was already in his 20th year when he was baptized. Nicetarus was baptized in adult years. Basil, the son of a Christian, and Eubulus consulted together and were baptized on their faith at Jerusalem. Posthumanus made a glorious confession at his baptism. John Chrysostom was suffered by his parents, though they were Christians, to remain unbaptized, not receiving baptism until he was 21 years old. Also his views respecting baptism, his teaching against war, confessions, etc. Jerome was born of Christian parents, was baptized at Cyrodion, where he was 30 years old. Augustine, Adalatus, Alpius, Euodius, Epiphanes, with his sister, all baptized upon faith. Conclusion of baptism in the 4th century. That the holy order of the baptism of Jesus Christ was practiced also in the 4th century appears from various teachings and examples of the Fathers, from which we shall present only a few, but such as are certain and genuine testimonies. A.D. 301, at the close of the preceding century, for A.D. 300, we introduced the eminent Arnobius and showed that, speaking of baptism, he says that the candidates for baptism, when they are baptized, state before the minister their perfect willingness and make their confession with their own lips. This Arnobius follows us also in the beginning of this century, namely through the years 301, 302, 303, 304. And having not abandoned his previous views regarding this matter, he confirms then with the following testimonies. Speaking against the tenets of the Romanists who ordained, consecrated, or properly speaking, exorcised water for baptism, he writes thus: "It is written, Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the water, that is, says he, the heads of the dragons in baptism." But by saying in the waters, he means to signify that the same baptism can be administered in all kinds of water, as in rivers, lakes, wells, baths, seas, etc. In these, the head of the dragon, that is Satan, is broken in all waters. Of the virtue and benefit of baptism, he teaches as follows: Psalm 32, where the psalmist says, "In the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him." The other one was in Psalm 74, by the way, where the psalmist says, "In the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him," upon which he remarks that men, by the true water of baptism, draw nigh to God, who is a refuge from the fear of Satan that encompasses us. Again, Psalm 32, he says, "Man is redeemed, no angel, nor any other creature, but man alone praises his mercy, says the Lord, whose sins he forgives in baptism." Although these words of Arnobius are somewhat obscure, yet they contain light enough to emit rays of divine truth concerning the matter of baptism. For when, in the first place, he says that the head of the dragon is broken in baptism, by dragon meaning Satan, he certainly indicates thereby that he speaks of persons who, having attained maturer years, become subject to the assaults of Satan, and that these in baptism break the head of the dragon, that is Satan, by means of true faith through Christ. Hence he does not speak of children who are ignorant of the assaults of Satan, and consequently not of infant baptism. Secondly, when he says that men, by the true water of baptism, draw nigh to God, he certainly indicates that he speaks of men who have departed from God through disobedience, consequently of persons who have arrived at the years of discretion, and not of infants. For how can anyone draw nigh to God by baptism who has not departed from him? Infants have not departed from God through disobedience, hence they cannot draw nigh to him by baptism. Thirdly, when he speaks of man who praises the mercy of the Lord and whose sins the Lord forgives in baptism, he certainly indicates that he speaks of men who are capable of praising the mercy of the Lord, namely men possessing understanding and who have sinned, for only he that has sinned can have his sins forgiven. But with infants who have never sinned, no forgiveness can take place, and consequently no baptism for the remission of sins. By this, the obscure words of Arnabas became clear. Note, P.J. Twisk records for the year 306 that Constantine the Great, the son of the believing Helena, was baptized in Jordan in the 65th year of his age, after having been instructed, from which it is apparent that at that time Christians left their children unbaptized in order that they themselves might believe and be baptized. A.D. 308, Fusca, the pious maiden, conceived a desire for the Christian faith when she was quite young, and having manifested this desire to the servant maid Murio, who also felt an inward drawing toward Christ, they were thoroughly instructed in the Christian faith at Ravenna by the teacher Hermola and baptized. A.D. 315, it is stated that already in the time of Sylvester, there was taught and maintained by the same doctrine which was afterwards maintained by countless members of the Baptist Waldenses, yea, that those churches which in the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and in subsequent centuries were styled Waldenses, Albigenses, and lastly Mennonites or Anabaptists, had existed already at that time, and indeed long before. Of this, a certain celebrated author among the Romanists bitterly complains in a very old book, saying, "These heretics, the people mentioned above, have always had many sects among them, but of all that ever existed none was more pernicious to the Church of God, understand the Roman Church, than the poor lions, the Waldenses or Anabaptists, and this for three reasons. In the first place, because of their antiquity, some asserting that they existed already in the days of Sylvester, others referring them even to the time of the apostles." In another place, Jacob Mettering writes thus about the above-mentioned people: "This is not a new sect that originated only at that time, that is, in the time of Waldas, For the papistic writers themselves confess that they existed already in the time of Pope Sylvester, nay, long before him, even in the time of the apostles. And another place he writes that Flacius has also recorded the same from an ancient papistic book, namely that they existed from the time of Sylvester, yea, from the time of the apostles, and that Thielman, though he compares them to another people, states that their doctrine has continued through many centuries. The time of the reign of Sylvester, who was the first pope of this name, and on the register of the Roman bishops, the 34th, is fixed in the year 315. A.D. 317, Donatus, an overlearned bishop of Carthage, who had many adherents in Africa, taught, among other things, that the preaching of the divine word and the administration of the sacraments by an ungodly minister were of no avail. They, his followers, held that the Church of Christ existed only among them, and hence they rebaptized all who wished to adopt the religion, saying that the heretics or the Pope had no Christian church and consequently no baptism, inasmuch as there was only one God, one faith, one gospel, one church, and one baptism. They, like the Anabaptists, also held, says Frank, that no children, even in the extremity of death, should be baptized, but only believing adults who desired it. When he was imprisoned and upbraided, Augustine, saying that no one ought to be imprisoned on account of his faith, God had given man his free will to believe as he chose concerning all this. Let's see. As regards Donatus, if it be true that he erred in some things or failed in some matter of faith, we will not defend him therein. However, this much is certain, that owing to the absence of his writings, we have no other information concerning him than which comes to us through the mouth and hand of his adversaries. Concerning this, P.J. Twisk, in a certain place, expresses his regret, saying that in his chronic for the year 410, he wrote something derogatory to his followers before he had been properly informed regarding it, which he afterwards, for the year 417, refutes and explains more clearly by quoting from Bullinger, that the followers of Donatus were similar to the Anabaptists, whom he calls Baptists, that they taught that no one ought to be compelled to do good or to accept the faith. Again, that every heretic should be left to follow his particular faith without restraint or compulsion. On this account, P.J. Twisk, in the same place, relates from another author that it is quite probable that these people were burdened with many unjust accusations. It would be desirable, writes he, to have in our possession their writings, teachings, and deeds, for it is to be the case that they were in all respects like the Anabaptists, and would compel no one in matters of faith, then it is sufficiently apparent that they are unjustly charged by other writers with tyranny. I have given this a place here because the year 410 was already arranged when this reached me. Note, we accept of the writings of Donatus only that which is good and true. For the rest, we assume no responsibility. Oh my goodness, what time is it? All right, I think I'm going to end that there for now, guys, and we will pick it up later. Absolutely, I want to read this more. But until then, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. Yeah. Let's see, hold on, let me mark this real quick. All right, yeah. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Have a great night. Bye.